How's it going with you, Nick?
Not too bad. So yeah, just let me know if I have the proposition correct. I'm not going to ask about any semantics or anything like that because I think I understand it. I just want to make sure that this is like exactly what you're putting on the table. I extracted it from what you told me over DMs. So
okay, yeah, for sure.
Pasture-raised, well-treated animal products are more ethical than anything from large-scale plant agriculture because it directly causes less suffering and death and is better for the environment. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
that's the gist of it. And then I guess the other proposition you agree with already, where like I argue that veganism is a spectrum. It should be viewed as a spectrum.
Yeah, I could get behind that. That just seems like kind of like, yeah, that's fine. I could view it that way. It's not a problem for me. Yeah, like there are actions that are more or less vegan than other actions, or more or less compatible with other actions. Or there are actions that are more or less compatible with veganism than other actions, I guess I should say. Yeah, I could get on board with that. That's fine.
How's my audio, by the way? Like, am I coming in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Loud and clear.
I'm literally just on speakerphone, so I don't have a proper mic set up or anything yet. So
no worries. So
go on. Yeah, and what was I gonna say? Basically, to like part of my my rationale for kind of this position too is just I want, like, I was a vegan. I still kind of consider myself like vegan in the sense that I do my best to like minimize the suffering that my choices would cause. And yeah, I genuinely am coming at this from like a place of good faith and a desire for like a better world. So and yeah, so I believe that veganism being viewed as a spectrum and being more inclusive of animal products sourced properly, and we can get into that if you want. I believe that that's more pragmatic as a whole and will entail more people pursuing the path of trying to be more vegan, essentially. And yeah.
Okay. So under your kind of understanding of what veganism is and what the aims of it are, is that to say that you consider yourself vegan, or roughly consider yourself vegan, and you also consume like pasture-raised animal products? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so we can
just
I
drink like beer. I drink like beer and stuff too sometimes, like as a good lad would. And I don't necessarily consider that vegan because there's like no essential nutrients. It's all just kind of like for pleasure, right? But it obviously involves monocropping, and then of course the byproduct of that process ends up as factory farm feed. So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily consider that vegan. So like I'm like imperfect kind of thing, and like I'd argue that a lot of people who consider themselves vegan are in that same way, but maybe don't acknowledge it as much.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting view. I'd have to think about that a bit more. So the view that's on the table about pasture-raised, well-treated animals, I mean, really this is three propositions in one. There's one claim about suffering, there's one claim about death, and there's one claim about the environment. We can just go through them one by one. So like pasture-raised, well-treated animal products are more ethical than anything from large-scale plant agriculture because it directly causes less suffering. We can start with that one. So what's the argument that plant agriculture, or large-scale plant agriculture, causes less suffering than pasture agriculture? Or did I say less suffering? More suffering. So like, let me just start from the beginning in case I misspoke about anything there. What's the argument that large-scale plant agriculture leads to more suffering than pasture animal agriculture? Are you there? Did we lose you? Check.
I think he's still there, but maybe his internet is dead.
Well, I mean, he said he was on his phone. He could be having a technical problem.
My bad. I think I accidentally disconnected. What was the last thing I said there?
Oh, we didn't hear anything. It was just dead silent. Did you hear my question?
I'm not sure actually. No, what was your question?
Yeah, for sure. My question was, what's the argument that large-scale plant agriculture causes more suffering than pasture animal agriculture?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I just want to quickly get out what I wanted to say, and that's just that I think suffering should be the and as well as harm caused to the environment because it supports all life. I think those should be more the center of what determines something being vegan rather than rights violations. Just because animals don't have any perception of rights or being exploited, rather just they have perception of suffering.
Yeah, that's fine. When we say vegan, we're probably saying two different things, but that's probably a conversation for another time.
Yeah, no, this is just my own view on like what I think would make more sense if more people like considered this, and I feel like it's just more pragmatic. But anyways, yeah, what's the argument for less suffering? Basically, I just consider what large scale plant agriculture does. Predominantly with pesticides. I know there's also like killing, like shooting animals in defense of it, and probably some minimal casualties from the combine harvesters. Although I agree that probably animals get out of the way for the most part of those. But yeah, I think pesticides are largely the biggest issue when it comes to that, and just cause them probably the most deaths and suffering. And then if you're on a diet of only pasture raised animals, you could conceivably end up eating just the equivalent of like one cow in a whole year, which would be just one death. And then I guess probably be eating some insects here and there, but yeah, to me that's kind of like a no brainer. I don't necessarily have like hard data on that, but it kind of just like makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I would actually take an agnostic position about differential amounts of animal suffering or death on pasture land versus cropland, because say you have some cropland, say you have some land in general, and you're trying to make a choice: should this be pasture land or should this be cropland? And you're going to be intervening on that land and making a choice about what it's going to be. Any death that's entailed from that action has to be included. So that means on pasture land, you also have to include like the predation, the natural predation that happens on that land. So insects eating each other, birds eating mice, those sorts of things, like insects that are probably trampled by the cattle and livestock that are on the land. Like all of those things are actually entailed by the action of making that pasture land. So they would have to be included in the consideration. It's not just the cow that's actually dying and or suffering when you choose to make that land pasture land. So I would just want some kind of comparative analysis of both cropland and pasture land to ascertain which one actually has more animal death. And actually, I would just accept animal death as a correlate for animal suffering, and I'd be able to concede. I would happily concede on both if it was just shown to me that cropland actually did entail more animal death. To me, it's actually not particularly clear that it does entail more animal death.
Okay, that's fair. Although, would you say though that the initial like act of putting in a monocrop field versus, let's say, just using already existing natural grassland, that kind of involves a whole, like, I guess you could say, biodiversity genocide in a sense to like get it to the cropland state?
Here's the thing. If we're just going by suffering and death, we also have to consider when we're coming across some wildland, we have an opportunity cost here. We could, instead of some wildland, we could have some cropland. We could have some pasture land. One of those types of land might have more or less animal death and animal suffering as well. It might actually be the most vegan thing you could do to have cropland there, right? If what you mean by vegan is lowering animal deaths and animal suffering, it might be the case that cropland is actually the best you could do, given the technology available. That's a possibility. I would just need to see like a differential analysis between the three different types of possible scenarios: wildland, pastureland, and cropland. I would need to see how many animal deaths are actually occurring on a given square acre, and just see in comparative analysis.
Right. Yeah, I kind of look at it as a sense of like, why should we be concerned with what happens in nature, kind of thing. I'm more just kind of concerned with what we specifically do, like what we specifically cause. Because you could also say like, I mean, we could just like pave over a whole given area and just it's all concrete, and then well, there's going to be less suffering on that land now, but we had to commit massive biodiversity genocide to get there, and then yeah, I'm also looking at it from an environmental point of view too. Like I think that's sort of my main driver. I've been an environmentalist for like a really long time, and I think that was my main driving force into getting into veganism initially.
Well, I don't take it to be the case that if your definition of veganism is just minimizing to the greatest extent possible, or the greatest extent practicable, or pragmatically to the greatest extent, lowering animal suffering and or deaths, well, you probably have to be in favor of like just paving over wildland to the extent that it doesn't create a tipping point on some ecological disaster. You know, if it doesn't go over that tipping point, that would probably be a moral good under that definition of veganism.
That's true. I guess that just basically means it's a problematic definition.
I mean, yeah, it could be just a problematic definition. It could be that the definition isn't actually lining up with your intuitions very well, because it seems like you have some kind of weird, I don't want to say weird, because I think a lot of people have this intuition. It's probably not very weird at all, but like you probably have some kind of notion of valuing nature for like what it is, or like you might like have some kind of sense of kind of aesthetic appreciation of nature, and you just kind of like the way it looks or whatever, or you like the way it operates. Yeah, a lot of people have like a similar intuition to that, and it's not exactly weird. I don't necessarily share those intuitions, so for me, I mean, it's kind of easy for me to get on board with different definitions of veganism and not really subscribe to ones that want to preserve nature, because at the end of the day, like, I am concerned with the rights violations of animals, and I don't know whether or not there's more or less rights violations occurring on cropland, or wildland for that matter, but it seems obvious to me that there's more rights violations on pasture land, and that's personally what I care about. So that's where I kind of come down on that issue. But yeah, as far as the kind of, is there more or less death or suffering on one land versus the other? Yeah, that's just an empirical question, and to this date, I haven't seen any super solid data on it, although I have seen some data on it that I could put in the text, in the VC text up here. So if you go to the VC text channel, I'm sure you can find it.
I'd be curious to see that.
Yeah, this is actually.
Say, though, sorry, not to interrupt. I just wanted to say though, like I feel like nature has a lot more, or just natural space has a lot more value than just like the aesthetic thing. Like I believe we should be in favor of I guess maintaining and even like rewilding too, like keeping like biodiversity as a thing we want, just because of like, you know, protecting all the natural species as well as the carbon sequestration. Fuck, I'm bad at saying that word.
It's all good. It's all good.
And,
well,
it's better for the environment to have the natural space, I guess.
Well, it seems interesting to me to take that particular position on a definition of veganism that just wants to minimize animal suffering and death to the greatest extent possible within the bounds of what won't cause an ecological disaster. So there's, under that definition, yeah, there probably is some amount of like wildland that you'd probably want to nuke in order to keep animals from dying and suffering in perpetuity, or to the least degree possible. But to get to the data that I was talking about here, in the VC text here, you can see that as cropland goes up, the taxonomic, they call it in the paper, they call it taxonomic distinctiveness. It's basically just a fancy way of saying how many species are on the land. It's like less than half as much when you have like really densely saturated cropland. It's less than half as much as having like as equally as densely saturated kind of pasture land. So there's twice as many species on pasture land than there is on cropland. Now, when we're talking about total animal death or suffering, this would imply actually that there's probably less animal death or suffering on cropland, because having more taxonomic distinctiveness on pasture land implies more predation, and more predation implies more animal death and more animal suffering. So from here, I mean, you could make an argument that it's likely the case that there's probably more animal death and suffering on pasture land as opposed to cropland.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to address two things real quick. Papillologists said in chat, what do you think the number one cause of deforestation and biodiversity loss is? Obviously, probably referring to deforestation of the Amazon for cattle ranching. And I just want to preface that I'm not in favor of that in any way.
I'm referring to global deforestation, not just the Amazon, everywhere.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm not in favor of that.
Well, how's it gonna
happen? I'm in favor of basically using already natural grassland for that purpose.
Well, the interesting thing about that, though, is that we literally don't have enough land to supply like everybody with enough animal-based calories from pasture agriculture. There was a report done out of Oxford, and it was called Grazed and Confused, and they had like 3 different models of basically like global grasslands. So all of the land that can be used for pasture, they considered it in their model. So that was basically all grasslands and pre-existing pasture lands. And they came up with 3 different models. There was a high and a low ball for like a plausible scenario, and then they had like a hyper idealized scenario. And in the plausible scenario, it was estimated that even if we covered the entire available surface area of the earth that could be used for pasture land with pasture land, we'd only be able to provide people with about 7 to 18 grams of animal protein per day per person. And in the hyper idealized scenario, we could only provide people with about 80 grams of animal protein a day. So to feed the world on like some kind of animal-based diet, for example, using grazing agriculture or pasture agriculture of any sort, even continuous grazing, which uses the least amount of land, we would be looking at like multiple Earths to feed the world with such a system. So eventually I think we would get to a tipping point where we probably have to include like some cropland just to get enough calories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think that we should be feeding the world on exclusively that. But I do want to say though that I think there's a lot of room in terms of like the more regenerative practices, as well as the like permaculture type of crop farming alongside animals, and then kind of like you can have like the animals grazing on like the crop residue and the byproduct and stuff. Like there's an article, I think it's called the role of animals in a circular food system. I can link it in chat. That's something that I very much believe in. But yeah, I'm not someone who thinks that that the carnivore diet, eating exclusively beef, is like going to be good for everyone or possible on a global scale, or necessarily even the best. Like
it's probably not going to be desirable for any of our goals. Yeah, but just as a kind of a point of process, and just because I'm going to try to be sensitive to your time, because you said you can only go like a little bit over the hour.
I could go probably like 20 minutes over it. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the only thing that I had to add right there pretty much was just, so you could admit that you don't really have any data to support the proposition that there's more animal death on, cropland as opposed to pasture land, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I wanted to address that as well. Yeah, I guess I just kind of edit my proposition then in a sense that I don't believe that that veganism should be looking at overall animal suffering, but rather the suffering that we specifically cause. Which I kind of I already meant it, but I guess I should have been more specific. But yeah, I'm not someone who believes that we should be like meddling in the natural order, so to speak.
Well, even under that definition, you're still gonna. I think you still run into the same problem, because as humans, we can intervene and we can make choices about what land is going to be. Like right now, it's a choice that we still have wild land, because we could pave over it. Right? Humans are making the choice to not destroy wild land right now. And that choice, the action, the very fact that you're making the choice to maintain that wildland makes you kind of responsible for what happens on it. So when we're deciding, should this be pasture land? Should this be cropland? Should this be wildland? These are all choices that we have, and we're kind of responsible for the downstream consequences of those. If it turns out that wildland is just complete chaos and just a death machine that just keeps on turning out animal death and suffering in perpetuity, I think humans should probably intervene on that and put an end to that. Stop it to the best extent that they can, without entailing some ecological disaster that kills us all.
I guess I maybe agree with that in like a perfect world, but I just don't believe that our priorities should really be there when there's just so much other stuff. In a sense, and I'd even get behind like the whole animals should have the negative right to not be eaten, not be killed unnecessarily or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with that in a vacuum, but I guess in practice, I don't really believe that it's possible to have a world without like a fully veganic world, and I don't believe that it's. I don't believe that crop deaths either fit that criteria either, kind of thing. But if we could have a perfect world where there's like no crop deaths and no animal deaths needed, and like we can get all the optimal nutrition that we need, then I'm totally in favor of that. But
yeah,
I'm just not entirely convinced that's possible, and I'm also I don't think that because animals too, like they're not capable of the what's the word I'm looking for.
I think you used the language before, like they're not able to like conceptualize our notions of rights or whatever, or they're not able to understand our notions of rights. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
that's
they're not,
probably true, but I mean,
they don't have our more moral capabilities. They're not sapient, and they're not. They don't have like the wisdom to be able to engage in that.
But that's also true of some humans, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. But we make that illegal, I guess, and yeah. I mean, you're talking about disabled people, I guess.
Right? Yeah. I mean, not even just disabled people. I mean, like there are infants that don't have any concept of rights, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't like advocate for them. Of course, we advocate for them, despite the fact that they don't have that concept. All I'm saying is that we extend that same advocacy to animals, even in the wild, right? We advocate for them because they, can't advocate for themselves, and it doesn't seem to be very relevant to me that they don't have a concept of rights. Like imagine like the logical entailments of such a position, right? From an ethical standpoint, based on what you're saying, like an axe murderer is heading toward a child, and it's like, well, I don't really feel like any normative demand to save the child because the child doesn't really have a concept of rights. So I guess in like protecting his rights isn't necessarily that important because he doesn't have a concept of it. Like imagine arguing it in the human case, it would sound absurd. And that's the way I think about it, right? And I just think like, well, I can't think of a morally salient difference between the human and the animal such that I would value the human's rights, but not the animal's rights in that case. So I would say I think we have an equal duty to the animals, So
I guess take the position that like a predator, a natural predator, doesn't know he's violating like the rights of an animal, right? But
we could do that for the human scenario.
Knows that he's violating rights, right?
But we could do that for the human scenario too. Like let's say there's a mentally handicapped person with an axe just running toward an infant. You're gonna protect the rights of the infant. If you were 100 yards away and you saw this event about to unfold and you had a sniper rifle, you'd probably take out the mentally disabled person with the axe to save the child from being hacked to pieces, right? I'd take that shot, and I'd take that shot in the animal world too. So that's kind of where I would come down on that.
Yeah, I'd take that shot in the case of protecting an infant, but I don't think I'd do it in a wild setting, and that's just because also that I don't really believe in the concept of animals having those rights. Contradiction time coming.
Well,
I know you've been over this with other people too, and it's not. I'll admit it's not fully logical, and like I said, like I'd agree with your position in more of like a sanitized world in a vacuum. so to speak. But yeah, the way I see rights is the sapient species would have them, and then there'd obviously be exceptions who aren't sapient, like disabled people or whatever. But we just kind of extend the rights based on the fact that the vast majority of the species is because humans are the only sapient species that at least we know of, really.
Yeah, I might have to do a little bit. I might have to do a little bit of probing into the semantics here, because I don't take sapience to be a property of species. I take it to be a property of minds. So I don't know what a sapient species is. I don't know what that means.
But like, you'd agree though that humans are like, I don't know what the percentage would be, but like probably like 99% sapient, right?
Oh, so like if all you mean is like by sapient species, is that like the majority is sapient, or like a super majority is sapient, or something like that?
Yeah, and like if we were in a wild setting too, right? Like obviously human civilization has come a long way. Like, but in humans in the wild before civilization was developed in any way, I don't think the like disabled people existed really. Like, is there any evidence that those like types of disabilities exist in other animals?
But wait a second. So under the definitions that you just provided, like let's say that the human race, the number of salient people in the human race dropped to 49%, right? Would it then become like morally permissible not to advocate for them, like in the axe murderer scenario?
Well, I guess I'd kind of just reject that as being not like a possibility.
Like, whoa, you know where this is gonna go. I don't think you want to say that.
I mean, okay, like fucking the laws of logic or whatever. Honestly, I'm normie as fuck. You can probably tell. I've never studied logic or any of these things. I've interacted a bit recently with Eric, Carnivore Atheist. Is that his handle?
Yeah, he's a card-carrying gibberish generator. I would just ignore everything that he says.
I don't know. I think he's, out of everyone that I've seen in the carnivore community, I think he's the most rational by far.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what he's doing. So he's not learning about logic in order to expand his knowledge of the world. His interest in logic is only insofar as it allows him to justify his behavior. That's about it. That's the game he's playing. I've had enough debates with the guy to know that that's the game that he's playing. I had a debate with him where he tries on different positions, like pairs of pants, to see how I will react to them, and he just picks the one he can live with the best. These aren't positions that he actually holds. Like, these aren't intuitions that he actually has. He's just trying to justify his behavior. He's like one of the most dishonest people you could possibly talk to.
Oh, really? Shit. Okay, because I had like a VC chat with him for like about an hour, and yeah, I'd say, I mean, he seemed pretty reasonable to me, but funnily enough, he said the same things about you.
Oh, I bet he would. Oh, he's just
bad faith and stuff. And I don't think you're bad faith, by the way.
No, I mean, I don't think so either. I appreciate you saying that. I think he's just like some kind of liar, to be perfectly honest. I've had enough interactions with him that I'm perfectly comfortable saying that is a generalization that fits. I think he's just kind of generally just a liar. But yeah, back on topic. I don't mean to like derail the derailment, but like back on topic here. Yeah, so you would admit that like you have no comparative analysis of animal deaths and animal suffering on either pasture land or cropland, right?
No, right, I know there's data on like the amount of deaths overall, like in like the U.S. on like insect deaths from insecticides. I don't know how much other data there is, but I mean, we know that like pesticides can leach into the environment and
speaking of pesticides, right? Nick, can I get 15 minutes with this dude?
That's up to him. That's up to him. I'm cool with it. If he's cool with it, then yeah, that's fine.
I'm cool with it. I mean, okay. Yeah, we probably won't be talking too much longer, but there was another thing I wanted to address too, and I know it's you view the protection of crops as not being a rights violation because it's a necessity to eat, right? It's a necessity to.
Well, just to be clear, there, I don't think it's a big issue on veganism because I think we would tolerate the same sort of defense of our crops even in the human scenario. Like even if they were fully realized human beings with fully human kind of equivalent cognition, I think we would tolerate that sort of force being used if it was equally as impractical to keep them from assailing our crops. I think we would tolerate that even in the human case. So I don't consider it to be a big problem on veganism. My conception of veganism is rights-based. So on my conception of veganism, I just don't consider it a big issue because I think we would tolerate it even in the human scenario. Like if we had like legions, just armies of retarded humans with little mechanical wings flying around, just buzzing around all over the place, whether they were fully realized human beings cognitively or not, and they were just eating up all of our crops, and they were causing enough economic turmoil that entire communities of people were going to die. I think we'd be justified using something like a pesticide on them, right? Even in the human case. So I don't consider it a big problem.
In that insane hypothetical, if it was the case, no, I agree. Your logic there is consistent. But I guess I wanted to ask, I guess, from the perspective of utility. We're doing it out of utility because we need the food, right? If we didn't need the food, then it wouldn't be justified. And that's kind of where I kind of go into the whole, I wouldn't consider alcohol vegan kind of thing. Or like maybe some other like coffee. I don't know.
Well, I'm not a consequentialist, so it might be kind of like just a waste of breath to talk about consequentialist kind of stuff with me. So because I'm not a consequentialist, so that kind of stuff's not going to move my needle.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, just out of the utility that we need to do this in order to survive, because we have a right to do that. I'm sure you agree, right? Then couldn't that just also be applied to an animal, like killing an animal to protect the food that like from that animal? I don't know if that's kind of like worded weird, but like it's in terms of like the overall utility and in terms of like of practice, to me it's like it's just like not really that much different, I guess. Like I have a hard time like I know like logically it makes sense, right? If we replace it with like a mentally disabled person, like it sounds crazy, but like just like I don't know. It's just as an animal, raising an animal and treating it well for its whole life, and then killing it for meat, it just doesn't feel. It doesn't seem to me that's more unethical than just defending crops from animals and killing them.
I mean, you might have you do have a consequentialist kind of conception of veganism because it's just like.
I'd agree with that,
yeah. More suffering, more death, more bad on veganism under my conception of veganism. That's kind of what you're running. It's like kind of like a consequentialist thing. I'm running a similar thing, but the object of value that's running in the sort of utility calculus or in the consequentialist calculus is just rights. So I'm running something similar. I think the object of value there under our different definitions of veganism are just a little different. Like you're just like, suffering and death, and I'm like, well, I'm more concerned with rights, and there are going to be some things that we agree on, right? Like I think it would be a rights violation to cause ecological devastation that would kill everybody on Earth. I think that would be bad. And I think that you think that would be bad. So there's going to be some overlap in our conclusions for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's part of why I view environmentalism as part of veganism.
So did you want to talk to Beans for a bit?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think he's just been waiting.
He wants to go over empirics for sure.
Yeah, I'm not super strong on the empirics really. So it's more his domain anyway.
But yeah, I did just want to say though too that I have a sort of another proposition, and maybe Beans would be interested in engaging with this too. But I feel like going back to like my position, trying to be more like pragmatic as a whole. I feel like a better system would be one without industrialized agriculture as a whole. Like I'm totally 100% against factory farming, and I think the vast majority of people, if you ask them, are, even though they engage in it, obviously. But I think if we like did like a huge like democratic referendum on this, I think it wouldn't be too hard to get the majority of people on board with putting an end to that, and I think that would be an overall good. And then kind of tie in monocropping with it because of the environmental harm caused to that, and just go into like whole ass just regenerative farming only. But any thoughts on that, Nick?
Yeah, I was just thinking. So you said you wanted to have like sort of democratic referendum against like sort of large scale industrial agriculture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would be the alternative there? Like regenerative agriculture or whatever?
Yeah.
Right. So we're on your definition of veganism, right? We're kind of back to square one here. Is that in order for that to be a good thing under your definition of veganism, you'd actually have to show that switching to such an agriculture system would actually entail less death and suffering.
Okay, I'm more looking at it from an ecological perspective, to be honest.
Well, you'd actually have to show that it would be more ecologically advantageous, and by whatever measure you chose as well. Like you have an empirical burden here, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'd just show all the data that we have on monocropping being terrible for the soils and releasing carbon, and then show the carbon sequestration of grasslands with like properly managed and grazed cattle, as well as the fact that grasslands can actually be a more reliable carbon sink than forests.
Well,
because they're less susceptible to wildfires.
That's contestable. So the carbon sequestration data, more or less, I know there are a few different papers on it, but the primary paper that's cited for the carbon sequestration stuff is what I just put in the VC text. And in that paper, you can find this chart, right, of what looks like carbon sequestration increasing over time. It looks like, this is however many years since multi-species pasture rotation was introduced on this desertified, depleted cropland. And look, the carbon in the soil is going up. But that's actually not like what it's showing. Like most of the carbon sequestration claims lead back to this paper. And that's not actually like what it's showing. This is
because it has a cap, right?
Well, no, this is cross-sectional. We don't actually know if this is like if this is a causal relationship. There is no temporal component in the analysis. It has years since transition to multi-species pasture rotation, but for individual data points, we have no temporal data here. This is all cross-sectional. This is, each one of these dots here represents a different farm, actually, not the same farm. And what's most interesting about it is that the farm at 20 years and the farm at 3 years, they're actually totally different. The farm on 20 years is like 20 years of cattle on there, or about 17 years of cattle on there. And the 3-year dot that is almost equal to it is 3 years of composting, which they have to do in order to prep the land to be grazed. So kind of what's implied here is that you could get the same amount of carbon sequestration potentially with cattle as you can with compost. So it's not even the case that we need to rely on regenerative agriculture, or it doesn't seem to be the case that we need to rely on regenerative agriculture in order to replete the soil, because it looks like we could just get that done with composting and crop dusting the place with grass seeds. So there is another thing here about that that's actually kind of interesting too. I'll have to find the paper for this again because it's one of those things that I forgot about. But
Okay.
This is from a paper that modeled carbon sequestration on pasture land. They had 3 different models: medium and low and high carbon sequestration rates and total carbon sequestration percentages. And basically, after 20 years, there's a saturation point where any additional carbon is just going to be runoff, and the average is just not really even that impressive in terms of the total carbon that's sequestered. So, like, it does sequester carbon, and we've modeled it, and we kind of understand that, pasture land does sequester carbon. It's just not very good. And it's not clear that the runoff that happens after 20 years is getting sequestered anywhere. Like, it could just be like ending up somewhere where it just gets reintroduced into the atmosphere. Like, we have no idea where it goes. And it's very clear that it has to be runoff, because where the hell is it going if it's not getting sequestered into the soil, right? So anything else is just going to be runoff, and it's not clear that that's good. If you had trees, you wouldn't run into this problem, right?
Right.
If you had trees, you wouldn't reach a saturation point nearly this low. Grass isn't as good as trees because trees are just literally bigger. Not only are trees bigger, but you can have trees on grass, right? So you have all this grass, and then you just have trees as well, and you have trees on grass, and trees are just so much bigger and so much heavier, and they have like a much larger root system. Like, half of the carbon stored below ground. So even if there's a forest fire, you still have like way more carbon sequestered in the ground than you would with grass.
Yeah, I'd agree that like definitely it would be better to have trees like mixed into and not just like straight grass. I saw like a picture. I think it was from like a certain farm that did that, where they had like fruit trees intermingled with pastures, and I definitely say that would be the ideal. But yeah, like going back to what you said with we could regenerate the land with purely with compost. What about though the need for large herbivores grazing the grass in order for it to actually like grow properly and not just dry up and then be just a wildfire risk?
What was the question? Sorry.
Like, in order for like a grassland to like be like fully functional, right? It needs to have a large like ruminant herbivore grazing on it in order for like it to not just like dry up and not be to reach its full potential.
I haven't seen any strong evidence of that. To be perfectly honest, like as long as there's ample water coming into the ecosystem, as long as there's like water coming into the ecosystem, I don't understand like why grazing animals would be necessary. And there's plenty of ecosystems like grasslands. There are plenty of grasslands that have no grazing animals because the animals actually refuse to graze there, because the grass itself in certain grasslands is not really anything that the animals there want to eat. So I'm also not sure like what this function talk means. Like I don't take natural things to have like functions necessarily. So when you say like the grasslands don't function, I'm not entirely sure what you're describing there. Like,
I mean, like as a carbon sink. I mean,
oh, like they don't act as a carbon sink.
It wouldn't be as effective because they're more prone to like I've heard all of this just from like various like TED Talks on the topic.
You're talking about Alan Savory's TED Talk. Alan.
I think I listened to his, and I think I listened to a few others. I know there's probably like 10 or so.
Well, unfortunately, Alan Savory refuses to publish on this topic. He talks a lot of smack about, people who are naysayers of his regenerative ag stuff. And he has like a lot of side-by-side pictures, but like no credible domain of science would actually consider that to be like good evidence for the notion that you need cattle to like regenerate land or whatever. He has like all these claims, but he just refuses to publish on it. He's actually pretty anti-science in his attitude toward.
That's pretty cringe. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much about a lot of those guys. I've just kind of like I've listened to the spiels, and I've engaged with people on Twitter who believe in it wholeheartedly, and like the way they explain it, and okay, that seems to make sense. But I haven't I haven't looked super into that. I just Googled. I think I just Googled
July, a lot of your positions are based
grasslands
on
need large
feelings
herbivores.
and TED Talks. Can we get to the data?
Yeah, I literally just found this study finds herbivores can offset loss of plant biodiversity in grassland. I was just seeing if there was a study on like, yeah, just what I was just explaining. But I'll share this. I've never seen this before, so I don't know the validity. But yeah, if anyone wants to have a look, there you go. Yeah, I'm not super attached to any of these beliefs too. I want to say that, like, a lot of people, I think, in the chat were saying GG got owned or whatever.
Yeah. Don't pay attention to the chat. I don't take you as the type of person, based on our conversation today, I don't take you as the type of person to hold beliefs dogmatically. I haven't gotten that impression from you so far. So, people typing in the chat, like, just give it a rest. So,
I came in here with an open mind. As I say, I was logicked into veganism. I was sort of logicked out of it. So I don't know. I'm in this weird middle ground, I guess, now.
So yeah, just to touch on the last kind of claim about environmentalism in general, or about the environmental impact. We do have, like, data of, if you think that wildland would be, the most environmentally friendly option, which seemed to be like what you were alluding to earlier, that, like, wildland would probably be a best case scenario, like maximizing the amount of wildland because biodiversity is good for the environment and yada yada yada. If that's the belief that you hold, then you should probably be in favor of veganizing the entire food supply, because that would free up the absolute most amount of land. There was a paper done that actually modeled 10 different, like, healthy dietary scenarios. Like, these were like healthy diets. They had a bunch of different omnivore diets, an ovo-vegetarian diet, a lacto-vegetarian diet, then a vegan diet. And then they had the baseline diet, which is just like standard American diet, business as usual. And they modeled, like, how many I think it's hectares of land per person would be required to sustain all of these different dietary patterns. And I mean, the vegan model is like the smallest chunk of land on the entire graph. So if you wanted to maximize the amount of wild land, it would seem that veganizing the food supply would be a pretty good way to do it.
I'm just a little skeptical on that, because I don't know if it, like, fully, if it, like, what's the word I'm looking for, acknowledges like the whole, like, how some lands are not suitable for crops, kind of thing, like hilly and rocky terrain, where it's like, whereas you can graze animals in that scenario. And then I'd also go back to the whole ability to have, like, a very biodiverse pasture land with fruit trees too. That could be, like, a good source of food that's also kind of mimicking wildland, like it's as close to wildland as possible in a sense. They can produce food and sequester carbon.
I'm actually not sure why it would be the case that you could manage animals on pasture land that is hilly and rocky, but not manage crops on land that is hilly and rocky. I've heard this before, and I haven't seen a reference for it, actually. Like, I've never heard anybody actually, like, I've never seen anybody actually deliver evidence that would divulge that there is some kind of differential capacity for the land based on, like, the type of agriculture that you're going to do as a function of it being rocky or hilly. Like, I've never seen data on that. So to me, it just seems like a claim, and a lot of people just, like, seems like they just use their intuition. So it's like, oh, it's just obvious that this is the case. And I was like, oh, it doesn't seem so obvious to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, in order to have, like, large scale cropland, you kind of need like the heavy machinery involved with it, right? And I guess that doesn't work as well if it's like, if the terrain is just really bad. That would be, like, what I would say. But I mean, obviously, if it's like a smaller scale plant agriculture, then that's, like, it doesn't require heavy machinery. Then I guess there's no reason why it would work.
So there's also this report that kind of agrees with the other kind of reports that I found, that when you look at the carbon opportunity cost of different lands, like it comes up pretty much the same. Pasture is not carbon neutral. It's not carbon negative. It's actually carbon positive. And when you compare the use of pasture land to the use of like cropland, let me get the exact like figure here. There's one really good one. So this is actually modeling cropland and pasture land in different dietary scenarios. So when you look at the business as usual model, it's carbon positive. When you look at the Eat Lancet scenario, it's carbon negative. But then when you free up all of that pasture land and all of the extra cropland that would be freed up by, not having animal agriculture, like the carbon sequestration would be massive compared to having any other system, or at least these two other systems in the model. And I'm not convinced that pasture land has an advantage over cropland in this case. It would just need to be empirically like demonstrated.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to have a look at all of these because.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no problem. Like if you wanted to come back some other time after you've had a chance to look at them, that's all good.
Thanks, I appreciate the invite.
But just to be sensitive to your time, because you said you might be able to go 20 minutes over, and Beans only wanted 15 minutes of your time. So if you guys started talking now, it would be right on time.
Sure. How about me, Beans?
Okay,
What's
cool.
up, man?
Okay, so you started this conversation by saying that you're worried about crop deaths, and you mentioned a few factors, and you said pesticides are the biggest in your view, right?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that you have no data; it's just how you feel.
No, there are studies on like actual deaths caused by pesticides, but I don't have them.
I meant data as in like for each crop, like how much is responsible regarding plant agriculture, regarding pasture, and so on, right? So if I give you data that shows exactly where pesticides are used, and it's actually mostly used for animal agriculture, would you change your views?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, like going back to that too. Like, I mean, I'm not like a fan of growing crops just to be fed to animals, nor am I in favor of growing crops where I know a lot of them are used for like oils too or whatever, and then like the byproduct or whatever byproduct, quote unquote, because maybe that's like maybe the main product in a sense, the most profitable product. I'm not a fan of any of that. So
yeah. So if you look at my reference here, I'm gonna reply to an old message. This is a list of each state in each year, each pesticide, and each type of crop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we take the 2019 figures, the latest figures, and we plot them on a pie chart by each crop, right? We get this. It's loading. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes.
See it now? Yeah. So if we look at corn and soybeans, they represent 69% of total pesticide use across all states in 2019, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Most corn and most soybeans are fed to animals, and I know you're gonna say it's mostly factory farm or whatever. Okay. Then if you look at pasture and hay and alfalfa, which are basically what grass-fed animals eat, you'll see that it's 8% of pesticide use in US, right? That might seem little, but that's just for pasture and hay and alfalfa. Now, if
7%.
we
8%,
8%. Yeah, exactly. So if we look at the market share of grass-fed beef in the US, you will see, I'll reference the message again. It is 4% of the US beef market. 4% of the US beef market is grass-fed. Mm-hmm. And of that 4%, 8% is also grass-finished. So most grass-fed beef, the cows get half of their weight from corn and soybeans. And corn and soybeans, as you can see on this graph, utilize the most pesticides. So if you want to minimize pesticides and the related deaths, the best thing to do is to avoid animal agriculture.
I gotta ask though. Actually, isn't so? Yeah, you say 4% is grass-fed beef, and only 8% of that is grass-finished, and the rest of that is just it's grass-fed until they're sent to the feedlot, basically, right?
Yeah, and on that feedlot, they get basically half of their weight. So, like, it's at this point, should you even call it grass-fed? Like, they eat grass.
I totally
but
thought that was standard practice for all cows, though, all cattle. Like they're initially raised on pasture and then they're sent to the feedlot. Like I thought that was like
and in that feedlot, they eat corn and soybeans, and most of that corn and soybeans, they utilize most of the pesticides. Yeah. And
they probably fed a lot of corn byproducts.
So like add up the corn and the soybeans and the pasture and hay and alfalfa, and then compare that to the vegetable and fruit and wheat and other crops. And that's where most of our calories come from. Yeah, so you can see it's a bit ridiculous when you consider the proportions.
Yeah, I totally think that we should probably not monocrop that much corn and soy.
Well, we have to due to animal agriculture.
Yeah, and well, also to like the whole oil industry, the soybean and corn oil. And
No. I'll show you where most soy is going. 1 second, let me get.
Well, I know by like mass and stuff, but like
not even by mass, by value, by mass, and by calories. Most soy is going to animal agriculture,
and by the bean.
And by the bean.
Yeah, I was really skeptical of his claims in that debate. Like I ended up like talking to someone on Twitter about it, and like I think collectively found out that that even though like the soybean oil is worth more, like per pound or whatever, per amount, you get way more yield of byproduct.
It's not even most the value. Like if you look at the American Soy Association, I sent a text from their website. You can read it yourself if you want. It's 2 tiny paragraphs.
Okay, yeah. Do you have a link for that too?
Yes, I do have a link.
Please do. Oh, I think my girlfriend's home. I hear her. Fuck. I told her I'd make a salad. Ooh, are you guys still there? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay.
What are we gonna say?
Yeah, it was a total pleasure talking with everyone. I'd love to come back again and talk more about just everything. Sorry, I'm cutting a little short with you, Beans.
No worries.
Okay, just one last thing. Would you agree now that most of the pesticide used in the USA can be directly attributed to animal agriculture?
Well, I'll look into it, but like obviously everything you sent me and taking your word for it, yeah, for sure.
Okay, you can ask for further links if you want.
All right, sounds good. All right, have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for dropping by.
Yeah, no worries. Take care.
I'd say that went pretty well.
Yeah, he doesn't seem very baboonish.
No. The baboon
feelings,
vibes were minimal. Yeah, I mean.
I think you guys actually convinced him. It's kind of interesting. He came into a debate and you guys had more information on the topic than he had.
Yeah.
He seems pretty good faith, actually.